Welcome to Did You Know the Heart of It, a short podcast from Gloria Deo Academy. In each episode, we unpack the heart behind our school's practices and philosophies so we can grow together in our shared mission to raise lifelong worshipers, lifelong learners, and lifelong servants. Whether you're driving, folding laundry, or catching a quiet moment, we're glad you're here. In this episode, we're going to be talking about truth, goodness, and beauty with our head of school, Mr. Joe Fesler. Hi, Mr. Fesler. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Robin. Thank you once again for doing these. I think they're phenomenal and they're a great tool for our family. So thank you.
Absolutely. Let's start off by what is meant by this common phrase, truth, goodness, and beauty. We hear it a lot. What do we mean when we hear that in classical education?
Well, I really appreciate the question. I'm going to turn the question around, though, and kind of surprise you with a question back to you. And that is, why is it that you chose truth, goodness, and beauty as one of the topics to talk about in these podcasts?
I chose it because it is so commonly used. I attend classical education conferences, I read books on educational philosophy, and this phrase is recurring. It comes up often. I've heard you speak about it at preview days, so I kind of have an idea of the answer I expect. But I don't know that everybody that walks through our doors, maybe if they were not raised in classical education, maybe they came to Gloria Deo for another reason, like the 2-day-a-week model or the biblical worldview, that this is something hopefully we can introduce them to and that parents can be encouraged by it.
And so when you came to Gloria Deo, did you know about truth, goodness, and beauty, or was it something that you gravitated, like once you heard about it, then you're like, oh, what is this?
I hadn't heard about classical education at all. I was a public school teacher, and I came up through the public education system. I taught high school mathematics at public schools, both in Houston and in San Antonio. When I came here, the Lord really brought my family here when my oldest was coming to kinder. And as I started reading and picking up every book I could on classical education, and I felt like I had discovered something in an old attic.
Yeah.
And almost betrayed. Why didn't, I'm an Aggie. Why didn't they teach me this when I was getting my master's of education?
Yeah.
No one told me about this. And we hear it from, Dr. Christopher Perrin. He talks a lot about recovering classical education. And so I feel like I discovered this amazing thing that was hidden in an attic.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with classical education. And so I always come back to this. It's a very grounding to my parenting when I do home days with my kids. Is this leading me back and leading my kids back to what is true, good, and beautiful based on what I've learned? And so I'm hoping we can talk about that today.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So I got another
You did
question.
Put me on the spot.
Yeah, I know. So I apologize, but I got another question for you. So when it comes to those things of truth, goodness, and beauty, why is that important for you to bring your kids back to that? Like, what drives that? What's your motivator for that?
My definitions for that. So truth being God, that they know truth, which is God, his word, and what he has to say about the world we live in. What is good to help them make decisions throughout their life to know which way to turn as they hit crossroads in life, and then to appreciate beauty. And I know I've heard you say, if it is true and it is good, then it is also beautiful. And so my dream for my children is that they will be able to discern God's truth, make decisions on what is good, and live in the beauty of the life God has given us.
Okay, so I'm going to take this one level deeper.
Okay.
So I know, it's like you're really big on the spot, right? Because none of this has been talked about.
Yeah.
But when it comes to you wanting them to know truth, and which I think is a great calling that you have and that you're doing and living out in your home, but why is that so important to you?
We live in a culture that is overrun with so much information. I mean, we get fed information all day long, thousands of messages from marketing, everything we encounter, everything we look at. We mentioned in a previous podcast episode that we're always learning. It doesn't matter. It's not always learning in the classroom, but the world is constantly speaking to them, and that is in all forms. Truth, lies, all the gray areas in between. And I think because as man made in the image of God, we are called to know that we're made in the image of God and to know him and to serve him. So that's the ultimate truth that I would like my children to come to in their own hearts.
Yeah. So that's just one element of truth that I just, like, as a parent, what you're saying is, what I hear you saying, there is such a drive and desire for my kids to know what is true. And I want them to know what is true. I believe that all three, truth, goodness, and beauty, if we had time, we could explore all three, and I could ask you questions about those, but those are three elements inside of every human being that they desire more than anything else, is what is true. How can I find good? And then we are completely taken in when we see beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways, I guess, simply put, and as you know, in classical education, these are called the transcendentals, which just I don't like using those kind of words because I think that it makes it sound big. But the reality is they give meaning and purpose to all education. Anytime that a teacher gets up in front of the classroom and expresses something to teach a student, they're just wanting them to know something that is true. And they themselves believe it's something good. And in that process, hopefully our students find that beautiful.
Find beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the word truth, we in the New Testament where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The word truth is the Greek word for aletheia. And aletheia means reality. So you could translate that verse, I am the reality, the way, and the life. I am reality. So all of reality is God's reality is truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something inside of every man's soul that longs for that reality. The beauty of classical education is that we get to tell students, we know what you're really wanting. You're wanting truth, goodness, and beauty. That's why you want that for your kids. And as they grow up, they're going to want to know what is true. They're going to want to see what is good. And they will. They'll be awe-inspired by what is beautiful when those two things are in existence. So they're not abstract ideas. They're not slogans. They're foundational of the reality and ultimate goal of all of education. That's why I think parents need to fight hard, because as you know, when we get into relativism, someone will say, well, this is my truth, this is your truth, and they don't take it back to God, who is the truth. So educators can get up and say almost anything is true. It doesn't make it true. And I think parents need to fight for the educational system they put their students under, making sure that it points back to God as the source of all truth, goodness.
Mm-hmm. Well, how can parents cultivate a love for truth in their home? That's not just academically, but like what we talked about.
Yeah, so I'll bring this back to you again. I'm going to ask you another question, put you on the spot.
Okay.
How are you doing that? What are some of the things you're doing inside your home to promote truth, goodness, and beauty?
Well, I have 4 little boys at home that squabble and fight a lot right now. We have some sibling, there's always sibling rivalry, but...
So they're learning how to be little warriors.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the truth comes in, cultivating love for truth, that when something happens, when I'm addressing this, that I'm not just telling them they should listen to me because I said so. We've got one that has a very strong voice, very strong, outspoken leadership, but his words come across very harshly. And so we've been doing Proverbs 16:24 of like, kind words are like honey. And we keep coming back to God's truth on that, his scripture, and then to help him navigate making a good decision when he hits a situation with a brother. And then there's beauty when we reconcile in that relationship. Yeah. And so even though I feel like I do it 1,000 times a day, but I'm going to do it over and over and over again with my boys, because I know one day I'm going to cultivate and see the rewards of that.
Yeah.
Them being in good relationship with one another and in relationship with the Lord and his word.
That's good. So, around here, and I'm just going to expound on that just a little bit, because I think you're right. We talk about this idea when big emotions hit us, they hit us because we're telling ourselves a story. And sometimes that story isn't true. Sometimes we're believing the wrong narrative in life. Yeah. We believe something, or we tell ourselves something that may not be exactly accurate, but it fits our life. Well, I think what you're doing with your boys is you are coming along and saying, right now, you have created this narrative, but here's God's narrative for you. Here's who God says you are. Here's how God would want you to think through that. And you're helping to shape the narrative for their life through all circumstances. What you're really doing is you're saying there's something true. there is something good and there is something beautiful, and it is a narrative that you get to tell yourself. And ironically, often when we are telling ourselves the wrong narrative, it's not true, it's not good, and we don't get to see the beauty. And that's just a great acid test for us to determine, is this narrative God-centered narrative, or is this narrative something else? Is it more about my experiences or my fears or my insecurities? So in some ways, when you ask the question, how can parents help promote truth, goodness, and beauty in their home? I think it is, in a simple terms, and this is just one way, there's a million ways, but to really help shape the narrative of your child's heart to where they accept or fight for God's narrative over their own narrative of selfishness or dominance or whatever it is. But
and this applies academically too. So when a student on a home day is struggling or is, we're getting to tears over math or a writing and rhetoric assignment, that to bring it back to this narrative of what are we believing? What is the student believing about themselves? And for parents to recognize that and to help walk them through that.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of courage for a parent to even ask a child, like, what is the narrative that you are telling yourself that I think? But that takes a lot of courage from a parent, because sometimes a student would say, yeah, I hear you saying you don't care about my grade, but right now, the narrative I'm telling myself is that I'm worthless if I don't get this grade. And so, but I think that takes a lot of courage for a parent to lean into that. But yet, really, to answer your question simply, how can parents cultivate a love for truth in their home? One is to just make sure that they are helping their student fight the battle of believing the lies. Like, fight that battle, get in the good fight, and believe about you what God says about you.
Okay, next question. In what way, and am I going to get another question, or will I?
That's great. I like it.
Okay. In what ways can families pursue moral formation at home? Maybe I answered this a little bit, but modeling and encouraging goodness in a way that aligns with a classical Christian understanding of virtue.
Ooh, this is a good one. Okay. So my question for you is going to be simple, right? How are you modeling and encouraging goodness? Like, what kinds of things are you doing in your home?
Oh, I ask for forgiveness for sure.
Can I just pause you right there?
Yeah.
I actually, when you asked the question, that is the very first thing that came to my mind, that God alone is good. And when we can help our students understand that God's mercies are new every day, I think you are promoting goodness in your home. That this is not about perfection. It's not about we did everything right. It really is about living a life where God is so good that we can live a life of repentance and responsibility.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Truly. Yeah. But that's what I was kind of, I think, where I was leading is that because really all goodness comes from the Lord. And so I will never be able to do everything on my own. Even, no matter how much I love my children and want to parent them well, man, we all have off days.
Yeah.
And so asking for forgiveness and asking for it often and showing grace and forgiveness to my kids when I can.
So. Yeah, I think that's great. The other thing I would add to that is if it is good, then it will line up with the very nature and character of God himself. And so when good things happen inside the home, I think it's incumbent upon a parent to pause, stop, and acknowledge the characteristic or nature of God that's happening right then and there. I'll give you an example of that. Let's say that you have one of your young men in your home, and he decides to share with another young man, one of his brothers in his home. That is supernatural. I don't think that we as parents often acknowledge the supernatural that's happening inside of our home constantly. Or if I have one of my kids and something they see or experience, and there's this softness, a kindness to that, a gentleness, any of the fruit of the Spirit that is displayed, I do not take the time in my home to stop and say, wow, God is on display in your life right there. I don't point out the good. And I think that as parents, we should spend a lot more time pointing out the godness, the goodness of a moment.
Okay, last question. What are some simple, meaningful ways parents can integrate truth, goodness, and beauty into their daily rhythms or challenging school at home days?
So I'm just going to ask you, what are some ways that you promote in your daily rhythms truth, goodness, and beauty?
Well, I'll recap some of the things that we've talked about. One is in behavior and how we relate to each other as a family. Another is what's going on in my kids' heads how they view themselves and relate to their academic work, that comes out a whole lot on our school at home days. And so going back to truth, goodness, and beauty and walking them through that, when we're struggling with math or writing, whatever it may be. And then the last thing is when I speak to my children when we're in the car or we went somewhere and we've left that place and they're thinking through their experience or some interaction they had in the world, walking them through truth, goodness, and beauty from a biblical worldview when we go through experiences, when we go through Chick-fil-A or whatever, the library, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's really good. The only other thing I would add to that, I think parents need to be more real and authentic with their kids. And we need to go back to and capture a sense of awe and wonder in our own life. If we want to see what is true, good, and beautiful, but we want our kids to see that, it really does start with us rewinding, going back, and starting to see things fresh and new through their eyes. I'll give you an example of this. I was out the other day and I saw a spot of dew on a piece of grass, and the sun was shining through it, and it was coming off at this purplish color. I was like blown away by that. This is just amazing. I looked over, there's another one. It came through like a green color. Another one came off like a blue color. And I was fortunate enough to be walking that morning and I was able to pull one of my kids and say, hey, look at this. Look at all the myriad of colors that are out here. This dew is just that is God's beauty on display. You didn't have to do that, right? You didn't have to even let us see color. But parents and teachers alike, we need to slow down and have a sense of awe and wonder about the world around us. Even goes back to this idea of goodness. When we see someone doing good or we hear someone say something kind to us, be able to stop and tell our kids, hey, listen, did you see what just happened? Like, that's God working through that person. Isn't that amazing that God works through people? And having a sense of awe and wonder, in my opinion, I think those are very simple, meaningful ways that parents can integrate truth, goodness, and beauty into the daily rhythms of their life.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us today about truth, goodness, and beauty.
Well, thank you. And thank you for letting me put you on the spot. I really appreciate that.
We know that finding a school that partners in discipling your child without compromising your family's values can feel overwhelming. Gloria Deo Academy offers a collaborative, classical Christian education where your child can authentically live out their faith and thrive academically and spiritually. Find out more at www.gda.academy. Thanks for listening.